Welcome to the Power of Hospitality podcast, a place where we discover the stories behind the most iconic luxury brands and influential figures who have shaped the hospitality industry. I'm your host, Jupiter Humphrey-Bishop, and in Series 3, we continue our journey by exploring the history behind and creation of some of the most famous and well-recognised luxury brands within the hospitality industry. I'm delighted to welcome today's guest to the show, Geordie Willis, Creative Director and Director of New Ventures at Berry Brothers & Rudd, a company world-renowned for its history, quality and consistency within the wine industry. Founded in 1698, the company also pioneered the UK's first temperature-controlled wine cellar. Being a board member and an eighth generation within the family business, who manages the brand's visual identity, he started his journey in the cellars at St James's before moving on to a business development role working over in Hong Kong, and has also worked as a brand experience director. Geordie, shaping the business for the future, brings innovation and storytelling through its craftsmanship and history. We're delighted that he is here today to share his insights into the world of wine and business, bringing it into luxury hospitality. So thank you so much for being here today. It's a pleasure to have you in the studio. Why don't you start by introducing yourself and talking about how your journey began?
Sure. So I have been working at Berry Brothers & Rudd, the wine merchants, for over 25 years now, across various parts of the world and in various different roles. And you mentioned my job title, Director of New Ventures. I wear quite a lot of different hats. I also sit as creative director as well. I'd need a very big business card if I had everything on the same line. But broadly, my role includes looking at how the Berry Brothers & Rudd brand manifests itself across all the various different touch points, but also looking at new ventures, which is a really fun thing to do in a business that is over 325 years old now.
Wow. And of course, the company began in 1698, and has had an incredible history, and originally started selling coffee was part of the business. Perhaps, tell us about the history of Berry Brothers & Rudd and how did they get to where they are today?
Well, one of the confusing things about the business is if you look at the sign outside, it's not a wine barrel. It's a coffee mill sign. Mm-hmm. So for many years, we were referred to as the sign of the coffee mill because back in the late 17th century, we were selling tea, coffee and spices. And groceries, we were referred to as an Italian grocer, which was a generic term. The families didn't have Italian heritage, but Italian grocers were people who sold things by the gross, by the weight. And we were selling these luxurious goods because they were expensive. It wasn't quite as mundane as perhaps Tesco's or Sainsbury's or something like that. Into the private houses and private clubs of St James's, which was the absolute epicenter of luxury and this sort of new London, which was evolving after the Second Great Fire of London in 1698.
Wow. Yeah, so much history to it. And of course, you've worked with the company for, as you said, like kind of over 25 years. So, and that's taken you over to America and to Asia. Perhaps tell us about how your career journey with the company has been, and
well, I started off not really thinking I was going to work there. So I worked in London in the magazine and publishing world, and I started coming down and working on a Saturday in the wine shop because I needed some extra pocket money. The magazine industry wasn't particularly well paid. And I started working below ground and really loved that experience and came into contact with wine and spirits really for the first time, not necessarily by enjoying tasting them, but by moving boxes and recognizing labels and so on. I then eventually got asked to come upstairs, and I thought I was about to be promoted. I was called upstairs by my uncle, Simon Berry, and he said to me, not, here's the big promotion, but when are you going to leave? Which was a surprise.
Wow.
Yeah, it was something that we'd started writing into family contracts, which is that family members had to do at least 3 years outside the business.
Okay.
Which was a brilliant idea. It came from his time when he studied at Harvard Business School. So I went off and went back into the creative industry, but went back into a creative agency before heading out to Hong Kong, where we had a business in 2008. So that was the sort of starting point. It was a stuttered start before spending some time in Hong Kong and then coming back to London in 2012, around the time of the London Olympics. That's what I always remember it as.
Wow. And so now as your role as creative director and director of ventures, you have played a part in the opening of the Spirit store, and mentioned in an interview that how you lent on 3 centuries of kind of history and helped to kind of create a place fit for the future. Perhaps tell us about that opening of the store. It sounds fantastic.
Well, we have this extraordinary building down at the bottom of St James's Street where we've been for 300 plus years. And it's much bigger than it looks. So the shop that some people might recognize, this small, rather archaic shop front at the bottom of the street. But it's a bit like an iceberg. It goes down and below, where the size of 2 football pitches below ground, we're 12 buildings above ground.
2 football pitches?
Yeah, so it's quite a lot larger than it looks.
Oh my gosh.
And part of my role as creative director and director of new ventures is looking at property and how we utilize that property well. We had for many years Get Wine and Spirits under St James's, but that probably wasn't the best use of real estate in central London. So we had built a warehouse back in Hampshire in the 1960s. So we moved a lot of stock there, and we started to utilize some of those spaces in St James's. So over the years, we've continued to do that. And the corner site, which was always ours actually, but it was rented out to a company who were selling cigars. And when they got to the end of their lease and moved out, we were able to take that space back and turn it into a spirit shop, because we'd always had wine shops, or certainly in the last 25 years. But they had a section where we had spirits rather than necessarily a spirit shop. So this was an opportunity to give spirits, I suppose, the platform that they deserved, but also to link the shop on Pall Mall round to the shop on St James's Street. So it was almost the final piece in the jigsaw to complete things and put them back into place.
Incredible. Wow. And, being an 8th generation member of the family, that's, such a incredible thing. So that must come with a lot of, huge responsibility and pride that comes with that. Does that kind of perhaps influence your work each day? And how do you feel to kind of hold that representation?
I guess it does. I think people who've worked in family business and worked in family businesses for a long time in some ways don't know anything different. So, it has been 25 years of my career. That said, there is a huge pride that comes with working in something that's been around as long as we have. But I think always, particularly when you've got an old business, you can look backwards at the history, and that's fun, but also looking forward at what's happening next. And I think part of being part of a family business, particularly a family business that thinks about the long term, is that every generation of the family are able to make their mark and make their impact. So you're not just looking over your shoulder the entire time. You're also looking to the future and working out what perhaps my grandchildren or my family's next generations are also going to benefit from and want to take on as well.
Wow, yeah. And at Berry Brothers and Rudd, you also have, as well as all of this, an amazing collection of event spaces. So you've got the Napoleon cellar, the Sussex cellar, the Bourne room, and the townhouse as well. Yeah. So perhaps tell us about these amazing spaces, and what does it feel like to dine in one of these cellars?
Well, I suppose we've been inviting people into our spaces for many years. We talk about experiential retail and things like that these days, but actually, I suppose we've been doing it for a long time. Certainly 100 years, where customers have come in and enjoyed being with us and being immersed in the brand, particularly around things like wine and food together. So it was a sort of natural extension to bring people into the space and to look at releasing some of the cellars downstairs as event spaces. And what started off as a relatively small operation, we thought we were going to do 50 events a year. That was our ambition, which we thought was quite ambitious. The managing director, I think at the time, said, you can probably do 75, and we sort of learned a very quick lesson in managing upwards.
Wow.
But to put it into context, now at Christmas we'll be doing probably 50 events a week.
50 events a week?
Yeah, so we'll do 1,000 events a year downstairs in the cellars.
How do you have time to?
It's all
how does it work?
choreography. we can have 250 people through a day. There are multiple dining rooms.
Wow.
We have 1, 2, 3, 4 kitchens. So interestingly, it's a small part of the business, but we have around the same amount of people, about 30,000 people who come through the event spaces, which is equal, coincidentally, to the number of people who come through the shops.
Okay.
So even though they're very different, they're all part of the same story. And yeah, we've loved doing them for years. We have public spaces and we have private spaces. So we have spaces that can only be you can only be invited into, and then we have spaces that you can hire as well.
Wow. And yeah, because I saw that you host all different types of events from kind of wine tastings, create your own cellar experiences and dining, and then those kind of corporate training. So at Berry Brothers and Rudd, what would you say perhaps is the kind of main focus? Is it more of those kind of parties and receptions, or is it more of the training and the corporate kind of events?
It's a real mix. So in fact, when we say corporate, we tend to think more about businesses coming in. So less about the sort of corporate training side. It's as much about people coming in. A business might want to bring in their top customers for dinner, for example. So we split it 3 ways. We have ticketed events where anyone can buy tickets and come and join a larger group of people, often around a theme. It might be a Burgundy or Bordeaux dinner. It might be a particular winemaker coming in and showing their wines. We have corporate events, which is those companies coming in and hosting. And then we also have private events or social events where people might come in having an anniversary or a birthday or something like that. So it's a real split across the 3. And I suppose wine is the red thread that runs through all of them, but it's not always the main topic. So some events are more wine focused, a little bit more educational. We have a wine school as well, actually. So some of it is quite educational, but a lot of it is much more experiential and social. And wine is the backbone rather than necessarily the main conversation.
Would you say that the clientele perhaps has changed over the years?
Yeah, I think so. I think that perhaps I'll give you a challenge. If you think of what a typical wine merchant's customer might look like, you're probably thinking male, a certain age, pinstripe suit, quite St. James's proper. And there is still a bit of that, of course, but I think that the world of wine has changed quite dramatically. So the audience is younger. The wine school particularly is really fun, young and vibrant. The event spaces themselves lend to people coming in and really enjoying themselves. So wine should be fun. It shouldn't all be about malolactic fermentation and crop yields and stuff like that. And so we have a younger audience, a more split audience in terms of male to female. It's a really fun, evolving space that is probably not quite what people might imagine the business could be, I suppose.
Wow. And of course, with these events, you even have a chef that's had experience training in different places, in kind of free Michelin star places. So, quite often when you think about an event, you have the food and the wine's there to kind of complement it. So does the chef create the food to complement the wine?
Yeah.
Does he do it so that the wine takes center stage, would you say?
Yeah, I think that's very much the case. Stuart Turner, who has been with us, our head chef, has been with us for almost 20 years now.
Yeah.
And a lot of chefs have an interest in food. A lot of chefs have an interest in wine. But one of the main things for us is that Stuart starts with the wine and then moves to the food. So if you go into a restaurant, a sommelier would come to you after you've ordered your food, most likely, and he'd say, "Well, what have you ordered? What would you like to drink?" and he is matching it backwards. What Stuart is doing is he's looking at the wines that we'll be serving on that evening, and then he will be matching his menu to those wines. And even when we have our menus, traditionally a menu would have food on the right-hand side and then wine on the left-hand side, if you're doing a menu for an event. The way that we do it is we have the wine on the right-hand side and the food on the left. So the first thing you see when you open up the menu is the wines that you'll be drinking.
Oh, wow, okay.
And then it's matched backwards. So Stuart has a really talented team of up to 10 chefs working at any time. Many of them have been there for many years. We've got a more rolling cast there as well, but they are all people who think about wine first, and then food is the natural accompaniment to that.
Yeah, such a great concept. I love it. And okay, so how do you kind of cater for these events? Do you have kind of an in-house team, or do you kind of source from outside? And do you ever host events perhaps not at Berry Brothers?
Yeah.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah, well, we've always, we benefit from having this amazing space, so we do a lot in-house. And Stuart and his team in the kitchen, we've got an events team who are probably 25 people strong, between organisers, educators, admin and so on. Increasingly, we're doing events outside the business as well, because we feel that the brand can stretch to some of our partners. So we've done events at places like Heckfield Place, Estelle Manor in the Cotswolds. Wow. So there are often opportunities to take the brand elsewhere. At the same time, we love our spiritual home, and therefore bringing people into that space as well. But often, all of our customers aren't based in London. So the events offering historically has always been a very London-centric offer. So to be able to take the brand, I think we did an event a couple of years ago up in Edinburgh, where we went to this extraordinary hotel up there. So we can quite often take that expertise out into the wider market, where our customers don't have to travel quite so far to come and see us. Wow.
And of course, has Berry Brothers and Rudd, have you collaborated with any kind of other brands during its very long kind of period of history?
Yeah, we do some collaborations and partnerships. We work a lot with the wine and spirits brands themselves. Okay. We talk about our customers being in two directions. There are the customers who consume the wine, but those customers who produce the wine as well. So the merchant acts as the middle person there. We work very closely with Walpole, so we have lots of luxury partners in that world. And actually, back in my period during my Hong Kong period, we had a shop within Alfred Dunhill, which was a sort of interesting, different type of partnership. Wow. where the retail space sat within another space. So we have, I suppose, lots of friends and partners in the luxury world. So there's good crossover. The thing that we always try and do, though, is ensure that we add value rather than just pouring wine. Mm-hmm. So if you think that a lot of the time people might come to brands like ours or other wine or drinks producers and say, we're doing a wonderful event, would you like to come pour the champagne? It's a nice idea, but actually what we try and do is create meaningful partnerships where there is brand synergy and where there is opportunity in both directions rather than just a pouring opportunity. So how would you kind of then develop those relationships with those brands? So if I say I was a hotel owner, and how would I kind of perhaps find out about what your company could offer, and how do you strengthen that connection? We try and be very proactive. So we have a wholesale business as well. So we're often already selling into the best hotels in London, for example. We then look to build those relationships through the concierge side. So the important thing for us is that if a hotel, and of course being in St. James's, we're surrounded by some of the greatest hotels in the world, that if a guest in one of those hotels is looking for an experience or an opportunity to come and buy something special, that the concierge is pointing them in the right direction. Mm-hmm. So there's I suppose a lot of networking that happens in the softest, most gentle way, where we get to know people in those establishments and hope that we can send people in their direction and they can send people in our direction. But again, that symbiotic relationship is what always works best. So everyone is benefiting, including the customer.
Yeah. And so it sounds like the company then kind of sells most of its wines through these kind of 3 different categories, that through kind of to individuals, those smaller scales, to corporate clients, those kind of hotels and restaurants, and then through experiences. So would you say to Berry Brothers and Rudd that, you know, they're all kind of equal priority, or do you perhaps have one that's more of a primary focus for the company, selling wines through?
I suppose what we're known for is helping private customers build collections.
Yeah.
And whether that's wines for immediate drinking or whether those are wines that people are laying down in temperature-controlled warehouses to drink at a later date. So we have warehouses in Hampshire that have capacity for up to 40 million bottles. So
40 million bottles?
Yeah, so there's a lot of space down there because wine, it's incredibly important to keep it well. Mm-hmm. And a brand like ours, I suppose the main product in many ways is trust, and that's what you build up over many years and many generations. So when we work with a customer, we often work with them for many years, not least advising and supporting, you know, almost acting like a trusted friend and a guide in the relatively complex world of wine, but also as a custodian of their stock as well. So customers might keep their stock with us for 10, 20, 30 years, often cross-generational as well. We have situations where cellars are passed down. So there is a responsibility that sits beyond just the transaction, the sort of typical retail style transaction. So that's probably what we're best known for. The wholesale side is important, but it's smaller. And then the experiential side is becoming increasingly important, not because we haven't always done it, but I suppose we're being a little bit more considered in terms of how we do it now. Because wine, whilst it benefits often from being stored for a certain period of time, wine is best enjoyed when it's open and drunk with like-minded people.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we try and do as we bring interesting and like-minded people together. And wine becomes the lubricant for interesting conversation rather than the entire conversation. So experiences is in a way the special sauce. The private client and collecting model is where the reputation comes from, and then there are other bits of the business that support. But everything is an ecosystem. Everything feeds into itself.
Fantastic. And so the company Berry Brothers and Rudd actually received their first royal warrant as well back in, I want to say, 1903, and then received their second royal warrant to mark their 300th anniversary. You know, how does it feel to kind of receive these royal warrants, and does that perhaps, you know, help strengthen the brand?
I mean, we've been supplying wine to the palace since the reign of George III. So for a long time, we've been involved in the palace. The warrant, you're quite right, you're very good on your dates, came in at 1903. For something called King's Ginger, which is a slightly different product. It's something that we created for King Edward VII, which was a ginger liqueur which he drank when he was out around his estates. The warrant, to me, and I think people do understand this, but given the fact that the warrant is about consistency and supply rather than necessarily quantity, the fact that we've been able to hold warrants for so long goes back to that sort of magical word of trust. And I think that that's what it always stands as a marker to me, is that we continue to do something right. I think increasingly, I suspect the warrants will lean into the world of environmental and sustainability as well. So those checks and measures that we put against the way that we do business aligns with what we do as well. We became a B Corp company a couple of years ago now, which for a very old business is complicated and hard, but something we felt very passionate about. So I think that the warrants will continue to be a marker of excellence. Whether everyone understands them, I think it rather depends where you are in the world in terms of what it means. But it's a useful shortcut to tell some of our story without us having to explain something which is relatively complex as a 300-year-old narrative.
Wow. And of course, so back in 1967, Berry Brothers and Rudd was kind of the first to launch its kind of UK's temperature controlled first wine cellars, which is amazing. How does that, how has that kind of, or has that influenced, perhaps how the business continues to strive forward and kind of push those boundaries of the wine industry? Does that, has that had any influence on how perhaps the business is now, would you say?
Yeah, I think that being a business that's been around for a long period of time often suggests that you haven't changed much, and people would be forgiven for thinking that if you come into the old reception. It is a little bit like something out of Harry Potter, but the reality is that businesses can only continue to thrive rather than just survive if they are constantly changing. There's a quote in a wonderful Italian novel called The Leopard, which is that if things are to remain the same, everything must change. I'm quoting that badly, I suspect, but the essence is right. That if you want to continue to exist, you have to be constantly changing, and innovation is a really important part of that.
Yeah.
So when it came to things like our state-of-the-art storage in Hampshire, we felt it was really important that if we were looking after our customer stock, that we had to be the custodians of it rather than passing that on to a third party. We've always felt that we can keep the history and the heritage, but do things which are interesting and new at the same time. And I think sometimes that if I look back at previous generations, what I want them to do is to recognise the business, but also to see how much it has evolved and changed.
And the company also has 3 masters of wine as well. Yes. So perhaps for the listeners, explain what a master of wine is and what's their kind of role within the company.
So we've always worked. What does a master of wine do? There are just over, I think, 420, maybe 421, 422 masters of wine in the world. So it's a very small group.
Very small group.
Master sommeliers and masters of wine are both considered to be some of the most exhaustive exams that you can do in the world. Really complicated and tricky. And these individuals who obtain these awards are the very top when it comes to knowledge, expertise, and are the standard bearers for, I suppose, education as much as anything else. But they also work across businesses. So you have masters of wine who are journalists, you have masters of wine who are educators, you have masters of wine who work in buying functions and so on. So it doesn't necessarily restrict you once you're in a business in terms of where you might end up. And our masters of wine work across the business. And over the years I've been there, we've had masters of wine who've worked in retail, we've had masters of wine who've worked in buying, in events and education, and across the business. So they are I'm in awe of anyone who's done it, because it is an unbelievably difficult exam, and we're very lucky to work with 3 brilliant masters of wine now. But they're a pretty rarefied group.
So in 2011, the company then added their own in-house fine wine and authentication manager, kind of going as a wine detective within the business. Using kind of blue ultralight light and magnifying glasses to kind of detect all the different wines and checking kind of the originals and the counterfeit bottles. So how important is this for the company? And it's such an interesting role. Yeah. And kind of why did you decide that this was something that the company should get?
I think in 2011, we were starting to bring people's collections into our cellars for the first time. And in doing so, we had to make sure that our stock that we were holding was exceptional stock. So it made sense to put that check and measure in place. It was probably considered quite extreme at the time to be doing it. I don't know any other wine business that has a wine detective.
I've never heard of it before.
No, it's a cool job description.
It's a very cool job description.
Because wine is the important thing is that there are different parts of quality and authentication. So because wine is a constantly evolving thing, often that is drunk over many years and is stored for many years.
Yeah.
One part of this is quality control. So we might come back to it, but with auctions, we have an auctions business, and if someone is putting a wine into an auction, you need to make sure that it is of a quality that it's expected for the age. The forgery side is important as well. Of course, it's particularly 15 years ago, you were starting to hear more about wine forgery, because wine forgery is a complex and complicated piece as well. So we felt that it was worth training up a member of staff who'd already been in the business for some time, Philip Moulin, and he went off and trained with the very best in the industry. And his knowledge is, we're talking about the masters of wine having exceptional knowledge, but Philip's knowledge is extraordinary. And you're right, he gets down there with the eyepiece like a jeweler, and every bottle, for example, that comes into our auctions goes through that very rigorous process, because we need to ensure that, again, back to trust, that everything that goes through has our mark of approval. So when you're looking after so much wine for people, that is a constant job, but quite a fun job as well. The producers have lots of fascinating little tells on labels and so on. So he is the custodian of that knowledge. He doesn't always tell you, because you don't want people who might have nefarious intentions to be knowledgeable about those sort of things. But spending an afternoon with Philip in the warehouse with the black light and the ultraviolet and the eyeglass is an extraordinary thing, because his knowledge and his ability to do it is quite something. Not that we ever really find them, but at the same time, it's every single bottle has to go through that check.
So kind of like the Sherlock Holmes of the wine industry.
It is a little bit.
And the shelves in Berry Brothers and Rudd are filled to the brim of all different wines. Is there perhaps some wines in the cellar that you're just most proud of?
Most proud of? Well, we've got lots of extraordinary bottles, and I suppose there's a balancing act. There are bottles that you're proud of because you've looked after them for many years. We have a family reserve in St James's, which has bottles going back to the 1830s. And it's extraordinary to see those bottles and to open those bottles, because you realise how important storage and provenance is when it comes to wine. So I have a lunch in a couple of weeks with a customer who's flying in from the other side of the world, who will be opening bottles going back to the 19th century. What will be exceptionally exciting in that instance is how well they'll be drinking, because we know that they've been stored well.
And in 2025, the company officially launched in the US, which is amazing. How's that been received, and what was the kind of the motion behind that driving factor to make that launch?
It's been a really fun project. So we've always had customers around the world. We have customers in over 100 countries around the world. We opened up in Asia in the late 90s. So we have bases outside the UK and have done for a long time. The US, we've been looking at for many years. We knew the US very well, particularly through Cutty Sark, which is a whiskey that we invented back in the 1920s, which was a big US market. But we've been looking at opportunities to get into the US as a wine merchant and retailer, probably for as long as I've been in the business, if not earlier. And we saw an opportunity to open up in Washington, D.C., and the opportunity to build a store out there as well, which was a really fun project. Complicated doing it from a distance, because, of course, building a shop in St James's, which we did back in 2017, our first sort of modern retail store. When you're living next door or working next door, you can be around there every 5 minutes. In the US, that was slightly different. So lots of video phones and telephone calls. But we wanted to get closer to our customer out there. The US is still a huge market for fine wine, and it's going really well. The shop is about a block and a half from the White House. It's quite central, It's acting as we hoped it would as a beacon for fine wine lovers. So we're finding a lot of customers through that. And I can only imagine it will continue to grow and thrive over time. But yeah, a really positive start. It's sort of unreal or surreal to think that an idea that is 25 years in the making has finally come to life, but we're thrilled with it.
And where do you see the kind of the company evolving in the future, and perhaps where do you see the industry kind of going in general in the future, perhaps over the next decade or whatever? So
I think that the experiences side of our industry will continue to evolve. I love getting people into vineyards, for example. We have a vineyard. We bought a vineyard a couple of years ago in Hampshire called Hambledon.
Of course, yeah.
You come across Hambledon?
I've come across them before, yeah.
And they have a wonderful farm-to-table restaurant there. So I think we'll also increasingly see how the perhaps paradoxical worlds of wellness and wine can come together around nature. I think we'll continue to see sustainability being a major topic, and probably a next generation of consumers who consider that a hygiene factor rather than a nice to have. So the way that businesses consider environmental and sustainability. And how would you like to see, as a company, how would you like to see your consumers and clients then kind of sharing that? So perhaps, the hotels and the companies that are kind of buying your wine, how would you like them to then kind of share that with their consumers? Are there perhaps special glasses or serving temperatures or certain information that should be shared whilst they're consuming those wines? How would you like those buyers to share it with the consumers? I think there are certain rules which are helpful with wine. Things like serving temperatures and glassware are good examples. However, I think that if things are too restrictive, then they often strip some of the fun from it. Okay. I think that there is a scientific logic to a certain glass shape for a certain wine. But equally, I think it is not necessarily always the place of the merchant to be preaching to a customer. We don't want to take the fun out of wine. You don't want to take the fun out of wine. Wine should be fun. Yeah. So I think that we can always give guidance, but ultimately wine should be enjoyed and consumed by individuals in any way that they want to. We can only suggest some broad guidelines and guardrails rather than be prescriptive. So I think the main thing is, if you've got the best glassware in the world, but you're drinking the wine with the wrong people, you're probably not going to have a great time. Whereas if you're drinking great wine out of a paper cup in the park with your best friends, you'll probably have a brilliant time. So, one has to get the balance right. Yes, it's always about getting the balance right. So for anyone perhaps that, really inspires to kind of work in the world of wine, what kind of key things perhaps do they need to be successful in that industry? And how important is it to get these kind of wine qualifications kind of at an early stage in their career? I think it's good to get wine qualifications. I mean, as much as anything, it shows a genuine interest, and it will probably help a CV, particularly if you're looking to work in wine retail or education. But often we'll see people who we just get a good feeling about. And I think that passion, integrity, generosity of spirit, we're looking for those things first in our business, and I suspect in other wine businesses as well. You can teach wine knowledge over time. Often there is no better place to learn about wine than working in a wine business or in a restaurant. But equally, there are wonderful ways of getting into wine through, whether it's the restaurant world, wonderful restaurants like Noble Rot. On Greek Street. On Greek Street, yes, yeah, and they have a wonderful. Even closer to me, they have one on Shepherd's Market as well, and Original in Lamb's Conduit Street. The great thing about restaurants like that is that they have this wonderful training program for sommeliers and so on, and it's relaxed, but it's academic. It's you can tell how passionate the team are. So I think that the best way of getting into wine is getting into wine first and foremost, going to tastings, building up groups of friends who are passionate about the same thing. But even someone with the best wine knowledge in the world, if they come to us to a job interview and we don't feel that they click in terms of their approach or their perhaps personality, if it doesn't align with our values, then the best wine CV in the world won't make a difference. You can teach that, but you can't touch the general. You can't teach the general approach.
So if there's anybody kind of listening today that's thinking, yeah, I really want to work at Berry Brothers and Rudd, I feel really inspired to work there, perhaps what are the kind of characteristics or the mindset that would kind of make them an exceptional candidate?
I think that regardless to where you work in the business, because there's obviously customer-facing sides of the business and there's back of house as well, but a mindset around service, a mindset around helping people and looking after people. So, hospitality and that hosting mindset, being an affable and an affable host is so important. I think that curiosity is also a huge important part of it. So I think the joy of wine in many respects is that there's always more to learn. And, even after 25 years in the trade, I still discover new producers and even new regions all the time. So if you're interested in wine and interested in people, that's a really good starting point, because looking at how you can help people build collections, but also whether you're looking at how you can deliver wine or service customers through customer service and so on, there's a huge amount that you can do in the wine trade, as well as just the sort of typical wine retail and so on.
And what would you say is the kind of key to maintaining this such special brand with all this kind of magic and specialness, for so many years in a family generation business? What's the kind of the key secret to its lifelong success?
I think the family part is important. We're two families actually. We're Rudds and Berries, and having two families has been a helpful part of our evolution. But a family mindset, which is, to my mind, thinking about the future, but thinking long term and making decisions long term, but also having the brand and the integrity of the brand at the front of our minds at all times. So we always want to be relevant, and that's quite different in our minds to being fashionable. So decisions are always made with a longer timeline, but also not to get stuck in the past and to feel like one is holding on to something which will become dusty and historic, because those businesses often die out. You have to be changing, you have to be evolving. If you're true to yourself and true to the brand, but also riffing off it the entire time, I think that's probably where the most exciting stuff happens.
Okay, so for Series 3, we're asking each guest to bring in a special item that's played a very special part in their career. This can be from either a book, a memento, or a little item. So what did you bring in today, Geordie?
So the first thing I brought in was this wonderful portrait of my grandfather, Anthony Berry. And he was someone who was very influential in my wine career. He was the first person who introduced me to wine, not always particularly grand wine, but he had a wonderful way about him and taught me an awful lot. And it's also a great reminder to me that family in a business like ours is important, and the way we make decisions is important. And I often think back to him and also John Rudd, Lizzie Rudd, our current chair, her father. And whilst they're no longer with us, I'll often think to whether the decisions that we're making or the way that we're behaving would be approved of by them. And they were quite strict judges of whether things were right. So that was something that I thought would appeal.
Very special.
Yeah, it's a lovely, lovely picture. And then I also brought, just because I had it, these wonderful bottles which are from Queen Mary's Doll's House. And I won't take them all out, but maybe we can get a close-up of them. But they are extraordinary little bottles that were created for Queen Mary's Doll's House in 1924, when the palace created this extraordinary, at the time, modern doll's house, which is quite big. It's still in the Royal Collection now, so you can go and see it if you ever visit Windsor Castle. And they asked the companies that they believed to be the best of the time to create various different things for it. So this, by the way, was a doll's house that had individual slates on the roof. It had
wow.
extraordinary manicured design gardens, individual books on the library shelves. And we did 1,200 bottles for the doll's house. They are all,
how sweet.
Yeah, they're cute. They're all an inch to a foot.
Gosh.
If I can pull one out. They're all an inch to a foot. These are just the empty practice runs. And what was amazing is that they all had the correct labels on them, which was sweet. They had a cellar book, which was all written, handwritten. But more importantly, they all had the correct wine in them. So they were all 100% accurate to scale. 1,200 bottles, all very, very small. So I thought that was quite a nice little reminder of doing something which had no logic to it. It would have taken us an enormous amount of time to create, but doing something well and doing something properly, I think, is a nice way of doing business sometimes.
That's so special. Gosh, what an amazing thing to bring into the studio. Wow. Okay, so we'll just do a couple of quick fire round questions before we wrap up for today. So what has been the most expensive bottle of wine that Berry Brothers and Rudd have ever held in the cellars or have ever sold?
We have bottles in the shop that go from around £13.50 all the way up to £20,000 a bottle.
£20,000
so there's a range, and whiskies that go up to almost £100,000 a bottle. So there is a range, but I suspect that there are some in the family reserve which would be considered probably priceless.
Wow,
I think.
Okay. So who has been the most famous guest that has ever visited the store?
Well, we've had lots, and they often come in without us really sort of knowing. We sort of hear in the daily sales report that such and such has been in. But it's probably fair to say we don't really talk about customers in that respect, but everyone from rock stars to royalty, it's been a complete stretch across, and we still look to invite interesting and interested people in the entire time. So there have been a fair amount of, I guess, what you'd call celebrities upstairs, but not ones that I would probably be able to name.
Okay. And if you, Geordie, could open any bottle within the Berry Brothers and Rudd cellar, which bottle could you open? Any bottle, and who perhaps throughout history would you share it with?
So I suppose I'm lucky because we do open interesting bottles quite often with customers. So I think probably I'd open something what might be considered somewhat mundane given the amount of wines downstairs, but we have a bottle called Good Ordinary Claret, which is the bottle that we sell more of than anything else in the world. And it was invented by one of my cousins, Christopher Berry Green. And it's designed in a way that is accessible but excellent. And I think sometimes when people get worried about wines being too expensive or too inaccessible, Good Ordinary Claret is a good reminder that if you've had good people selecting the best possible wine for the best possible price, you can find things that are absolutely excellent at that end of the scale. And who would I drink it with? I'd probably drink it with Christopher, actually. He's told me in his lifetime many times the story of how he created it and why he created it, so I'd probably maybe drink it with him. Amazing.
And finally, what would you say is your kind of favourite part of your job working at Berry Brothers and Rudd?
Well, it's a cliche, isn't it? But every day is pretty different. The joy of a role in new ventures is that it is by default behaving like a startup in a very old business. So I think the fact that you're constantly looking forward and thinking about the future rather than worrying about the past is probably the most exciting thing.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming into the podcast today and recording this. It's been such a pleasure to have you here today and to hear your story and all the history about Berry Brothers. So thank you.
Pleasure to be here. Thank
you
very
so
much.
Thank you. So that brings us to the end of today's episode where we interviewed Geordie Willis, Director of New Ventures and Creative Director at Berry Brothers and Rudd. Stay with us as we continue to interview some of the most inspirational and influential professionals. See you soon.